those of you who have been following along in this series, we are now up to the Comm Tech era, which was something done for episode 1 to increase value for the figure since prices had to go up. Previously, in order to compensate for the price increase, Star Wars figures had included with them a slide, because, kids love slides. And now that the price was going up another $1, another increased value pack-in was needed, and this was done with the Comm Tech chip, which every episode 1 figure, from Yoda to unnamed droids, came with. You had to buy an extra accessory to use these Comm Tech chips, and they didn't really work that great, but hey, to increase price value and to give a new reason to buy figures, it worked. And as I said, this was done for episode 1, which meant the original trilogy received a bit of a drought, because when episode 1 was all that, we got very few episode 1 figures. The few that did creep out during the 1.5 to 2 years where episode 1 was ruling the toy aisle were not only few and far between, but they did get the Comm Tech treatment, released as a separate line from episode 1. The final figures for Power of the Force 2, if you will. And thank you for the Toy Box for this great image showing Wave 23, which was the first wave of Classic Trilogy Comm Tech figures. Now this included all figures, mostly, that we'd gotten before. And once again, like the freeze frame figures that had preceded episode 1 to tie into the hype, we were getting redos of characters we'd already had, which at the time was a little controversial, because at the time, most of us collectors were looking at these figures as one and done. So the fact that we're now getting another Han Solo in his episode 4 outfit, more or less, was looked at as, do we really need another Han? I mean, we have this figure already. Well, of course, we were going to get many, 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 and this one was unique because it recreated an exact look for Han, specifically this one, where he has his hand above his head resting on the wall of the cantina. Yep, that's what we basically come down to in order to do variants of main characters that we'd already had to legitimize why you should buy another one. We were getting not only scene-specific, but pretty much moment-specific figures, which, looking back, is pretty cool. But at the time, a lot of us were like, another Han? But again, yes, looking back, we get main characters done over and over and over again because the line has gone for 30 years. And the original Power of the Force 2 Han arguably did need a redo. He suffered from that kind of solo-plex, beefed-up look that the original wave had to correlate with other figures that companies were releasing at the time. So yeah, getting a new Han that was thinner, that didn't have the buffed-up look, and, hey, could bend his arm at exactly that angle. It was cool, and it was a new Han, and it definitely stood out from the original one. The figure's gun actually went in the holster. He was cool. And he came with his archenemy, at least his archenemy in, the cantina, which was Greedo, also packed in with this wave as a Comm Tech figure, and a redo, our first redo of a background alien figure. So yes, we'd had Greedo before in an early Power of the Force 2 wave, and the new one did make a lot of improvements. While Greedo wasn't as buff as Luke and Han and some of the original figures, he did suffer from that a little bit, especially in terms of his head. His head was too small. So, for this new figure, we got an enlarged head, we got a removable vest, which actually had a blast scar under it, so hey, if you wanted to display him without his vest, you had options, and you could see the figure was a definite improvement over the original, and he would continue to be the template for many figures to come, looking at further improvements such as adding a vest and a holster, which actually makes this figure Beto, the character from Jabba's palace, because Greedo does not have a holster, despite the fact that Hasbro continues to release him over and over again with a holster, because I guess he's kind of a space cowboy, kind of like Han was in the cantina. But yeah, Greedo doesn't wear a belt with a holster. And that makes the original Power of the Force 2 figure and the Comm Tech figure the more accurate Greedo figures we've gotten. As Greedo has progressed, they've added more details like the soft goods vest and that blaster around his holster, the holster for his blaster. So this is probably one of the better Greedos we've had, although I will always cherish my original, even though he's very screen inaccurate. But come on, that's what the old Kenner figures were all about. All right. Moving on, we're going to return to Luke Skywalker, the psychotic young 18-year-old who kills animals with his flying fortress of doom. Okay, maybe it's not that bad. Dwight Schrute would argue it. Now, we'd already had redos of Luke. In fact, we very recently had a redo of Luke with floppy hat and long rifle, sort of the farm boy deleted scene version from the flashback series that was designed to get a lot of hype for episode 1. And hey, it worked. But this wasn't the first redo of Luke we'd had in Power of the Force 2. We had had one that shipped about 3 years after the original release that scaled down again that buffed up frame that the first release had, which was very much appreciated by fans because this figure, it's a little hard to read this as Luke unless you're thinking of this as the Luke from that original Star Wars poster where he's holding the lightsaber over his head. And again, much like Han, we would get many, many Lukes from A New Hope as years went by, although we still haven't gotten a Vintage Series one, which is crazy because he's the star of the movie, and this is his most recognizable outfit. Well, actually, we did get this version with a belt, but anyway, yeah, there's a lot of publicity sales. Publicity sales? Yeah, that's the right word. And different publicity shots. Yeah, we're going to go with shots. Now, this version of Luke that we're getting also, much like Han, commemorates an exact moment. It's this moment, right? Where Luke is sitting with a bent knee and playing with the toy that Obi-Wan Kenobi now gave him thanks to the Disney Plus show. So everyone remembers this iconic scene. Well, at least I do. It's one of my favorite scenes because I love skyhoppers. It's one of my favorite parts of Star Wars because it represents that slight off-screen moment. Luke is always talking about how he used to, fly through Beggar's Canyon with Biggs and, shoot womp rats because he's, psychotic. And the skyhopper's actually there in the movie. It's behind him when 3PO is getting his little bath there. So, yeah, it gets some mention and it is called out in dialogue later on in the movie, and there have been many different versions from different companies that have commemorated this moment when Luke is playing with a toy, because hey, when a toy comes with a toy, it's like, meta toy. I did really love when Power of the Force 2 came out with a Skyhopper vehicle for Luke, and now we finally had an action figure that could pilot the Skyhopper. So this is the Luke that I use in my Skyhopper toy to fly it, the one that came with a wrench and a toy. And look at that. Look what's down there. So yes, despite the fact that we've had many, many Lukes over the years, still we haven't gotten one quite in this pose. I don't think we ever will. But what's very significant about this Luke figure, it's the very first one with articulated knees. Now, we've gotten much improved articulated knees since then, but at the time, this was revolutionary, and it was actually pretty dramatic because now Luke could actually sit properly. And you'll notice they even packed him out in this crazy running pose to make sure you clearly knew this Luke had more articulation than any Luke that came before. It's a little bit of a weird pack out, but hey, it showed off the feature. Alright, the last figure in this wave was the one I was the most excited about, and arguably the only one that gave us an original character we hadn't had before, at least not since the original Kenner line, and that's the talking, walking, dancing box from Star Wars that we all know as the Gonk droid. Now, while some of us know that the Gonk droids are actually the most important characters in the movie, well, for others they're just background robots that hang out, and we recognize them from things like this shot in the Sandcrawler, or the shot in Jabba's palace, when I hope it's not the same Gonk droid, but he's being tortured to death? Can droids die? I don't know. But then there's another droid that is in the Lars homestead, this one that you see over Luke's shoulder. This is actually the droid from the original toy line. You can tell based on those little nods coming out the top, as well as the line that goes around, I guess, the equator of the droid. So the original figure shipped on a card that showed the droid from the Jawa Sandcrawler on the card art there, the photo, the toy is clearly based on this Gonk droid, the one that was most prominently seen in the Lars homestead. It has a light blue color and all those nodes coming off the top. Finally, this figure was released as part of the vintage line, but the card art still showed the wrong droid. They didn't change it to have the Lars family Gonk droid. They still showed the Jawa Sandcrawler. So, hey, who knows? And it wasn't quite screen accurate. They're still missing some of the color apps because this was a very unique Gonk droid. And yeah, there's no two Gonk droids the same. There's quite a lot of them seen throughout the trilogy. And Hasbro has done a good job of re-releasing this figure with kind of modified parts and, a removable top that can then be retooled in order to have sort of the different headpieces that they get, like in Echo Base where it has that weird squishy thing on it. Yeah, I don't know. Still don't know what that is. but at least it gives a different profile, and that's what toys are all about. So this droid, this Gonk droid, was packed with one of the cooler accessories, which was a Jawa. Well, okay, I think it was actually supposed to be a Jawa packed with a Gonk droid, but because we hadn't gotten a Gonk droid, but we had gotten Jawas before, I tend to think of this as the Gonk release, since that's the more significant figure. Although it isn't a bad idea to bulk up on your Jawas, since you do see quite a lot of them, and this Jawa in particular is very special to me. I've named him Bob the Jawa, and this is the Jawa that has come with me on many trips around the world and been the subject of photos in front of every monument that I've ever gotten to see. I guess it's kind of like my version of the Travelocity gnome. So, yep, there he is on my honeymoon with me, despite my wife's regrets. All right, so yes, Gonk droids, love them, hate them? No, you can't hate them. You can't possibly hate a talking walking box. And when a talking walking box comes with a gnome covered in robes with a blaster and a bandolier with glowing eyes, you pretty much have one of the coolest toys ever made in the history of ever. So you can see why I bought an extra of this, just so I could have a double Gonk droid and a special Jawa that I could drag with me on all of my worldwide trips. So, Bob the Jawa, we salute you. Welcome to the world of Star Wars toys.